I've been working as a parking lot attendant at a high-end shopping center in Tokyo for 12 years. In 2018, I took a weekend job at a Toyota dealership in Nagoya, and what I learned there completely changed how I look at every single vehicle that pulls into my lot. The mechanics at that dealership were amazed when I told them how long American inspections take. One of them laughed and said, "We can tell most of what we need to know before we even touch the car." He was right. The same assessment that takes a mechanic an hour with a lift and diagnostic tools, a trained parking attendant in Japan can do in 30 seconds just by watching the car arrive and listening to it idle. Japanese parking attendants are trained to spot mechanical problems the moment a vehicle enters the lot. American mechanics rely on diagnostic equipment and time-consuming inspections. Same problems, different approach, and here's what most people do not realize. By the time a check engine light comes on or a mechanic plugs in a scanner, the problem has usually been developing for months. Japanese attendants catch it when it first becomes audible or visible. That is the difference between a $200 fix and a $3,000 failure. Before I show you exactly what we look for, hit subscribe right now. This kind of knowledge does not come from manuals. It comes from seeing thousands of cars and learning which sounds and signs always lead to the same expensive repairs. American car culture treats inspections as occasional events. You take your car and when something feels wrong or when it is time for an oil change. Japanese parking culture treats every single interaction with a vehicle as a micro-inspection. The attendant who parks your car is not just moving it from point A to point B, they are performing a health check that most owners never know is happening. The philosophy is simple: catch problems when they are whispers, not screams. A transmission that is about to fail does not suddenly break. It tells you for weeks or even months that something is wrong, but you have to know what to listen for. That is what Japanese attendants are trained to do: listen, look, and document patterns that predict failure. Most parking attendants in America are told to watch for visible damage, so the business is not blamed for scratches or dents. In Japan, we are trained to notice mechanical deterioration because catching a problem early protects both the customer and the facility. If a car leaks fluid in our lot, we want to know about it before it becomes a puddle. If a brake system is failing, we want to alert the owner before they leave our property and cause an accident. This is not charity. It is risk management, but the skill set required to do it well is the same skill set that mechanics use. We just apply it faster. #1 Suspension, checking the ride height as the car approaches. The moment a car pulls up to the entrance, I am watching the front end as it approaches. Not the paint, not the wheels, the geometry. If the car is tracking straight on level ground but one side sits lower than the other, that is a suspension problem, either a failing strut or a broken spring. Most drivers never notice this because they sit inside the car where the angle is invisible. But from 10 feet away, standing at ground level, it is obvious. I have seen this on Lexus sedans with less than 60,000 miles because the owner never had the suspension inspected, and a small leak in the strut turned into total failure. The car still drove fine. It just sat crooked. That crooked posture puts uneven load on the tires, the steering components, and the opposite strut. What starts as a $300 strut replacement becomes an $800 job because the other side fails shortly after. I spot this in less than 5 seconds, before the driver even rolls down the window. #2 Engine idle, listening for misfires at rest. When the car comes to a stop in front of me, I listen to the idle before I say a word. A healthy engine idles smooth and quiet. You should barely hear it. If the idle is rough or if I can hear a rhythmic miss, that is a misfire, usually a bad ignition coil or a fouled spark plug. On a Toyota or Lexus V6, this happens most often on the rear bank because those plugs are harder to reach and people skip them during maintenance. The cost to fix a single misfiring cylinder is about $150. Spark plugs, maybe a coil, 30 minutes of labor. If you ignore it, unburned fuel gets pushed into the catalytic converter and destroys it. A new catalytic converter on a Lexus costs $2,000 or more. I have heard this exact failure pattern dozens of times. Rough idle for a few weeks, then the check engine light, then the catalytic converter code. All of it was preventable if someone had listened at the beginning. #3 Fluid leaks, reading the ground under the engine bay. As I walk to the driver's side door, I glance at the ground under the engine bay. If I see fresh drops or a small puddle, I know there is an active leak. Oil is dark and spreads. Coolant is bright green or pink and stays in a tighter pool. Transmission fluid is red or brown depending on age. Power steering fluid looks like transmission fluid, but the location of the drip tells me which system is leaking. A lot of drivers think a few drops do not matter. They are wrong. A small oil leak from a valve cover gasket costs $150 to fix. If you let it go, oil drips onto the exhaust manifold, burns, smokes, and eventually the gasket fails completely. Then you are adding a quart of oil every few hundred miles and risking engine damage from low oil level. I have seen engines seize because the owner ignored a small leak for 2 years. The repair cost was zero until it was not. Then it was $8,000. #4 Heater core, smelling the interior before sitting down. When I open the door, I smell the interior before I sit down. If it smells like syrup or antifreeze, there is a heater core leak. That is a dashboard out repair. On most vehicles, it costs $1,200 to $2,000 because the entire dash has to be removed to access the heater core. The leak usually starts small. You smell it faintly. Then you notice the windshield fogging up even with the defroster on. Then you see coolant pooling under the passenger side floor mat. By that point, the heater core has been leaking for weeks and you have been breathing vaporized coolant. If I smell it the moment I open the door, I let the owner know immediately. Catching it early does not make the repair cheaper, but it prevents interior damage and avoids the safety risk of driving with impaired visibility. #5 Brake master cylinder, testing pedal firmness before moving. Once I am in the driver's seat, I press the brake pedal before I shift into gear. A healthy brake pedal is firm. It should not sink toward the floor when you hold steady pressure. If the pedal slowly sinks, there is a leak in the brake system or the master cylinder is failing. Either way, this is a safety critical issue. I do not move the car until I confirm the pedal holds. I have had owners tell me the brakes feel fine when they drive. That is because they are used to the gradual decline. They adapt without realizing it. But when I press the pedal with fresh perspective, the problem is obvious. A failing master cylinder costs about $400 to replace. If it fails completely while you are driving, you lose most or all of your braking power. That is not a repair, that is a crash waiting to happen. #6 Transmission, feeling the engagement when pulling away. I shift into drive and feel for the engagement. A healthy transmission engages smoothly within 1 second. If there is a delay of 2 or 3 seconds before the car starts to move, the transmission is either low on fluid or the clutch packs inside are worn. On a Toyota or Lexus, this usually means the fluid has never been changed, and the transmission is operating on degraded fluid full of metal particles. A drain and fill costs $150 and takes 20 minutes. If you wait until the delay gets worse, the transmission will start slipping under load. Then it will need a full rebuild or replacement. That costs $4,000 to $6,000 depending on the model. I can feel this problem in the first 3 seconds of movement. Most drivers do not notice it until the transmission is already failing. #7 Wheel bearings, listening for growl while driving to the space. As I drive the car toward the parking space, I listen to the wheel bearings. A failing wheel bearing makes a humming or growling noise that increases with speed. It sounds like rolling over a rumble strip on the highway. Most people think it is tire noise. It is not. Tires hum at a consistent pitch. A bad bearing growls and changes tone when you turn. If I hear it during the short drive to the parking spot, I know that bearing is close to failure. A single wheel bearing replacement costs $300 to $500. If the bearing fails completely, the wheel can lock up or even separate from the hub. I have seen this happen once. The car was towed. The repair was over $1,000 because the failure damaged the hub and the brake rotor. All of it was avoidable. The bearing had been making noise for months. #8 Brake pads, listening for squeal when stopping. I apply the brakes as I approach the parking space. I am not just stopping the car. I am listening for brake noise and feeling for vibration. If the brakes squeal, the pads are worn down to the wear indicator. That is a built-in warning. It means you have maybe a few hundred miles before the pads are gone and the metal backing plate starts grinding into the rotor. Pads alone cost $150 to $250 depending on the vehicle. If you wait and let the metal grind the rotor, you are replacing pads and rotors. That is $500 to $700. I hear the squeal. I know exactly what it means. Most drivers ignore it because the brakes still work. They work until they do not. #9 Brake rotors, feeling for pedal pulsation when stopping. If I feel a pulsing in the brake pedal when I stop, the rotors are warped. This happens from heat cycling. Hard braking heats the rotor. If you stop and leave your foot on the brake pedal, the heat concentrates where the pad contacts the rotor and causes uneven cooling. That creates a warp. Warped rotors need to be resurfaced or replaced. The cost is $300 to $600 depending on whether resurfacing is possible. If you ignore it, the pulsing gets worse and braking performance declines. I feel this every time I stop a car with warped rotors. It is unmistakable, but most drivers have been feeling it for so long they think it is normal. #10 Steering, checking for play when centering the wheel. As I straighten the wheel to center the car in the space, I feel for play in the steering. If I can turn the wheel a half inch or more in either direction without the front wheels responding, there is slack in the steering system. Usually worn tie rod ends or a failing steering rack. Tie rod ends cost about $200 per side to replace. A steering rack costs $800 to $1,500. The play starts small. A little bit of wandering on the highway. A slight delay when you turn the wheel, then it gets worse. The car feels loose. You have to correct constantly. If I feel any play at all when I center the wheel, I know the steering components are worn. Most drivers do not notice until the play is severe because it develops gradually over thousands of miles. Hash 11, fuel pump listening after the engine shuts off. I shut the engine off and listen for noise after the key is off. If I hear a whining or humming sound that continues for a few seconds, that is usually the fuel pump or an electric fan. A failing fuel pump makes a high-pitched whine that is loudest right after shutdown. Replacing a fuel pump costs $500 to $1,000 depending on whether the tank has to be dropped. If the pump fails completely, the car will not start. It will crank but not fire. I have heard this noise dozens of times. Owners almost never notice it because they get out of the car immediately after turning it off. I sit for 3 seconds and listen. That is all it takes. Hash 12, warning lights, scanning the dashboard before stepping out. Before I step out, I check the dashboard for warning lights. Not just the check engine light, all of them. If the tire pressure light is on, at least one tire is significantly low. Underinflated tires wear unevenly and reduce fuel economy. They also increase stopping distance. Most people see the light and ignore it because the car drives fine. A tire pressure check is free. Replacing a tire that wore out prematurely because it was underinflated costs $150 to $300. If the ABS light is on, there is a problem in the anti-lock brake system. That could be a wheel speed sensor or a failing ABS module. The car will still brake, but you lose anti-lock function. A wheel speed sensor costs $150 to $250. An ABS module costs $1,000 or more. I glance at the dash every time. It takes 2 seconds. Hash 13, tire wear pattern, walking around to check the tread. When I step out of the car, I walk around it and look at the tires. I am checking tread depth and wear pattern. If the inside or outside edge of the tire is worn more than the center, the alignment is off. Tires should wear evenly across the tread. Uneven wear means the suspension geometry is wrong. An alignment costs $100 to $150 and takes an hour. A new set of tires costs $600 to $1,200 depending on the vehicle. If the alignment has been off for 10,000 miles, you are replacing tires that should have lasted 50,000 miles. I see this constantly. The tires look fine from a distance. Up close, one edge is bald. That is an alignment problem that has been ignored for months. Hash 14, tire sidewalls, looking for bulges and cracks. I also look for bulges or cracks in the tire sidewall. A bulge means the internal structure of the tire is damaged. It will fail, not maybe, it will. A blowout at highway speed is dangerous and expensive. The tire explodes, you lose control. Best case, you pull over safely and call for a tow. Worst case, you crash. A single tire costs $150 to $300. A crash costs thousands or more. If I see a bulge, I tell the owner immediately. Most people have no idea it is there because they do not walk around their car and look at the tires from the side. Hash 15, windshield wipers, checking the rubber as I pass the front. I check the windshield wipers as I walk past the front of the car. If the rubber is cracked or torn, they are not clearing water effectively. Worn wipers leave streaks and reduce visibility in rain. A set of wiper blades costs $30 to $60 and takes 5 minutes to install. Most people wait until they can barely see through the windshield in a storm. By then, they have been driving with reduced visibility for months. I replace my wipers every year. I see other people driving with wipers that are 3 or 4 years old, torn, streaking, barely functional. It is a $15 per year expense that people skip because it seems minor until it is raining hard and they cannot see. Hash 16, paint and exterior condition, using appearance as a maintenance indicator. I look at the condition of the paint and trim, not for cosmetic reasons, but because peeling clear coat or faded trim tells me the car sits outside and is not maintained carefully. That correlates with skipped maintenance. If the exterior looks neglected, the mechanical systems are usually neglected too. This is not always true, but it is true often enough that I pay attention. A car with perfect paint and clean wheels is more likely to have fresh oil and a recent inspection. A car with oxidized paint and curb rash is more likely to have old fluids and worn brakes. I am not judging the owner. I am using visible condition as a proxy for overall care. Hash 17, exhaust soot, reading the tailpipe for running rich. If the exhaust pipe has heavy black soot, the engine is running rich. Too much fuel, not enough air. That is usually a failing oxygen sensor or a dirty mass airflow sensor. The oxygen sensor costs $150 to $300. A mass airflow sensor costs $200 to $400. If you ignore it, fuel economy drops and the catalytic converter gets damaged from unburned fuel. I can see soot on the exhaust tip from 5 feet away. Most drivers never look at their exhaust pipe. I look every time. Hash 18, exhaust rust, checking for perforation at the back of the car. I also check for rust on the exhaust system while I am looking at the back of the car. Surface rust is normal. But if I see holes or heavy flacking, the exhaust is rotting from the inside out. Exhaust systems rust because combustion produces water vapor and acid. A failing exhaust manifold or catalytic converter can cost $1,000 or more to replace. A muffler is cheaper, $200 to $500. If I see rust perforation, I know the exhaust is near the end of its life. Most people do not notice until the car gets loud. By then, the exhaust has been leaking for weeks and failing emissions. When I close the door and hand the keys to the driver, I have already performed a more thorough inspection than most people get during an annual service. I did not use a lift. I did not plug in a scanner. I used my eyes and ears and 12 years of pattern recognition. The best part is that all of these problems are cheaper to fix early. A $300 repair that you delay becomes a $3,000 failure. That is not exaggeration. I have seen it happen over and over. The owner ignores the noise or the smell or the warning light because the car still runs. Then one day it does not, and the repair costs 10 times what it would have cost 6 months earlier. Japanese parking attendants are not mechanics, but we are trained to see the same warning signs that mechanics look for. The difference is speed. We do it in 30 seconds while the car is in motion. A mechanic does it in an hour with the car on a lift. Same information, different method. And here's the part that nobody talks about. Most mechanics do not get paid to inspect your car unless you pay for an inspection. They get paid to fix what is broken. A parking attendant has no financial incentive. We just see the problem and report it. That is why the Japanese system works. The person who spots the problem is not the person who profits from the repair. American car owners wait for something to break, then pay to fix it. Japanese car owners expect small problems to be caught early and fixed before they become expensive. Same car, same parts, different outcome. The Japanese Toyota that gets driven 200,000 miles looks and runs better than the American Toyota at 150,000 miles, not because Japanese roads are easier. Because Japanese owners and the people who interact with their cars are trained to notice problems early. Maintain it like the Japanese do or repair it like Americans have to. The choice is yours. Drop a comment and tell me what you drive and which of these warning signs you have been ignoring. I will tell you how expensive it is going to be if you wait. And if you want to know what Japanese mechanics do during an oil change that American quicklube shops skip every single time, that video is coming next. Miss it and you will keep paying for repairs that should never have been necessary in the first place.